The night was thick with the scent of damp earth and rotting leaves as Rodrigo and his 12-year-old son, Benjo, trudged deeper into the forest. What was supposed to be a shortcut back to their village after a hunting trip had turned into a nightmare. The trees seemed to shift, the path vanishing behind them as if swallowed by the wilderness. The flashlight flickered weakly, and Rodrigo cursed under his breath. They should have been home by sundown. Benjo clutched his father's arm, his small fingers trembling. "Tatai, I hear something," he whispered. Rodrigo strained his ears. At first, there was only the rustling of leaves, but then a low, guttural chanting coming from somewhere ahead. It wasn't human. The sound slithered through the trees, raising the hairs on Rodrigo's neck. Against his better judgment, he led Benjo toward the noise, hoping it might be villagers who could help. What they saw next would haunt them forever. A clearing opened before them, illuminated by the sickly glow of torches made from bones wrapped in dried flesh. Figures, tall, too tall, stood in a circle, their limbs elongated, their backs hunched like beasts. Their skin glistened under the moonlight, stretched too tight over unnatural bones. At the center of the circle lay a body, motionless, its chest split open. One of the creatures reached inside, pulling out something dark and pulsing. Benjo gasped. The chanting stopped. All at once, the creatures turned, their eyes gleaming yellow, their jaws unhinging like snakes. Rodrigo's blood turned to ice. Aswang's. The closest one sniffed the air, its nostrils flaring. It let out a screech that echoed through the trees, and then they charged. Rodrigo grabbed Benjo and ran. Branches whipped at their faces, the forest itself seeming to twist against them. Behind, the things moved impossibly fast, their laughter a chorus of nightmares. Rodrigo knew they wouldn't make it, not unless they found a way to fight back. And then, Benjo whispered the words that would change everything. "Tatai, I know where we are. Lola told me about this place."
The sun had already begun its slow descent behind the towering trees when Rodrigo realized they were lost. The forest, which had seemed so familiar in the daylight, now loomed around him and his son like a living thing. Shadows stretching longer, the air growing heavier with the scent of damp earth and something else, something faintly metallic. He adjusted the strap of his hunting rifle, feeling the weight of it against his shoulder, a small comfort in the gathering dark. Beside him, Benjo clutched the frayed edges of his jacket, his small fingers trembling. "We should have been back by now," Benjo whispered, his voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. Rodrigo forced a smile, though his gut twisted with unease. "We took a detour, that's all. The river path was flooded, remember?" He ruffled the boy's hair, but his eyes scanned the trees ahead, searching for any landmark he recognized. Nothing. The forest here was too thick, too wild, unnaturally so. The villagers called this place Kagubatan Nang Nanga Anino, the Forest of Shadows, and spoke of it in hushed tones. But Rodrigo had always dismissed their superstitions. Until now. A twig snapped somewhere to their left. Both of them froze. Benjo's grip tightened. "Tatai?" "Just an animal," Rodrigo said, though his pulse hammered in his throat. He shifted the rifle into his hands, finger resting near the trigger. The forest had gone eerily quiet. No birds, no insects, just the occasional whisper of wind through the leaves. Then, a sound. Not an animal, not the wind, a low, rhythmic chanting. It came from deep within the trees, a guttural murmur that seemed to slither through the air, raising the hairs on Rodrigo's neck. Benjo's breath hitched. "Who's out here?" he whispered. Rodrigo didn't answer. His instinct screamed at him to turn back, to run, but there was no turning back. The path behind them had vanished, swallowed by the shifting shadows. The chanting grew louder, pulling them forward like a cursed lullaby. Against his better judgment, Rodrigo led Benjo toward the sound, reasoning that if there were people, they might know the way out. The trees thinned suddenly, revealing a clearing bathed in the sickly glow of torchlight. But these weren't ordinary torches. They were made of bones, wrapped in strips of dried flesh, the flames flickering in a natural green. And in the center of the clearing stood figures. No, not figures, not human. Tall, too tall, their limbs stretched like twisted branches, their backs hunched in a way that made Rodrigo's stomach lurch. Their skin was too tight over jutting bones, their mouths too wide, lips pulled back in grotesque grins. They moved in a slow, shuffling circle around something on the ground. A body. Rodrigo's blood turned to ice. One of the creatures bent down, its fingers, too long, too many joints, digging into the corpse's chest with a wet rip. Benjo let out a strangled gasp. The chanting stopped. Every single one of the creatures turned their heads in unison, yellow eyes locking onto Rodrigo and Benjo. For a heartbeat, the world stood still. Then the closest one smiled, its jaw unhinging like a snake's, revealing rows of needle-thin teeth. And then, they charged.
Rodrigo didn't think. He moved. His body acted before his mind could process the horror unfolding in front of them. He grabbed Benjo by the arm, yanking him backward just as the first creature lunged, its claws raking the air where the boy's head had been a second before. A guttural snarl tore from its throat, the sound more animal than anything human. "Run!" Rodrigo shouted, shoving Benjo ahead of him. The forest, once silent, erupted into chaos. The creatures, Aswangs, his mind screamed, screeched as they gave chase, their movements too fast, too fluid, limbs bending in ways that made Rodrigo's vision swim. The trees blurred past them as they sprinted, branches whipping at their faces, roots snagging their feet. Benjo stumbled, a cry escaping his lips as he hit the ground hard. Rodrigo spun, raising his rifle. The closest Aswang was nearly on them, its elongated limbs propelling it forward in grotesque leaps. He fired. The shot echoed through the trees. The creature jerked back, a black, tar-like substance spraying from its shoulder. But it didn't stop. It didn't even slow down. "Tatai!" Benjo's voice was raw with terror. Rodrigo grabbed him again, hauling him up. "Don't look back! Just run!" They crashed through the undergrowth, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. Behind them, the Aswang's laughter echoed, mocking, hungry. Rodrigo's heart pounded so hard he thought it might burst. They couldn't outrun them. They couldn't fight them. Then, through the trees, a structure. A hunched, rotting shack, half swallowed by vines. "There!" Rodrigo veered toward it, praying the door wouldn't be locked. They slammed into the weathered wood, Rodrigo fumbling for the handle. The door groaned open and they spilled inside, collapsing onto the dirt floor. He kicked it shut behind them just as something heavy thudded against the other side. The wood shuddered. A clawed hand punched through the door, splinters flying. Benjo screamed. Rodrigo scrambled back, dragging his son with him as the Aswang's fingers flexed, searching. The door wouldn't hold. They were trapped. And then, from the darkness of the shack, a voice whispered, "You shouldn't have come here." The voice slithered through the darkness of the shack like a living thing, wrapping around them with an intimacy that made Rodrigo's skin crawl.
He whirled around, his back pressed against the rotting wood of the door as the Aswang's claws continued to scrape and tear at the barrier between them. The stench of decay filled the cramped space. Old blood, damp earth, and something sweetly putrid that clung to the back of his throat. A figure emerged from the shadows. At first, Rodrigo thought it was another Aswang. The way it moved was wrong, too fluid, too quiet. But then, the dim moonlight filtering through the cracks in the walls revealed an old woman. Her skin stretched tight over sharp bones, her eyes milky white and unseeing. Yet she looked at them, knew they were there. Benjo let out a choked gasp. "Lula Sela?" The old woman's lips peeled back in a smile that showed too many teeth. "Ah, you remember me, child?" Rodrigo's grip on his son tightened. This was no ordinary woman. The air around her pulsed, thick with something ancient and hungry. The Aswang outside let out a frustrated snarl, its claws retreating momentarily as if hesitant to approach. "You're dead," Benjo whispered, his voice shaking. "You died when I was 6. Lola Sela's laugh was the sound of dry leaves scraping against stone. "Death is not the end for those who know the old ways." She tilted her head, her blind eyes somehow seeing too much. "You should not have come here, little one. This forest is not for the living." Rodrigo's mind raced. He had heard the stories, of course. Whispers of obularios and mankulams who walked the line between worlds, of spirits bound to places of power. But this was something else. The Aswang outside slammed against the door again, the wood groaning under the force. Rodrigo braced himself, rifle raised, though he knew bullets wouldn't stop them. "Why are they hunting us?" he demanded. Lola Sela's smile faded. "Because you saw what you were not meant to see." She stepped closer, her bare feet making no sound on the dirt floor. "The ritual is sacred. The feeding sustains them. And witnesses? Witnesses become part of the feast." Benjo shuddered, his small frame trembling against Rodrigo. "Lola, please, help us." For a moment, the old woman's face softened. Then, with a speed that belied her frail appearance, she seized Benjo's wrist, her nails biting into his skin. "There is a way, but the price is blood." Rodrigo lunged forward, but Lula Sela was already pulling Benjo toward the far wall, where a crude symbol was carved into the wood, a twisted spiral, stained dark with old offerings. "Your blood, child. Only your blood can break the bond." Benjo's eyes widened in terror. "No!" The door splintered. Rodrigo turned just as the first Aswang forced his way inside, its elongated limbs contorting to fit through the broken frame, its yellow eyes locked on them, its jaw unhinging with a wet snap. And then Lula Sela screamed, a sound that was not human, not animal, but something older. The Aswang recoiled, hissing. "Now!" she snarled. Benjo didn't hesitate. He dragged his palm across the jagged edge of the broken door, his blood welling up in dark rivulets. As the first drop hit the symbol, the entire shack shuddered. The Aswang howled, not in hunger, but in pain. And then the shadows moved. The moment Benjo's blood touched the carved spiral, the world inside the shack twisted violently. The air itself seemed to congeal, thick with the metallic tang of blood and something older, something that hummed with power. The walls groaned as if the very wood were alive, warping inward as shadows slithered across them like living ink. Lola Sela threw her head back, her milky eyes rolling white as she chanted in a language that made Rodrigo's teeth ache.
The words were wrong. Too many syllables, too many teeth in the sounds. Benjo clutched his bleeding hand to his chest, his face pale with terror as the blood dripped steadily onto the dirt floor. The Aswang in the doorway shrieked, its body jerking as if pulled by invisible strings. Black veins erupted across its too pale skin, spreading like cracks in glass. It stumbled back, clawing at its own face as its flesh began to peel away in ragged strips. Rodrigo didn't wait to see more. He grabbed Benjo and yanked him away from the wall, pressing him into the corner as the shack trembled around them. The other Aswang outside wailed, their cries rising into a chorus of agony. But Lola Sella wasn't done. She turned toward them, her mouth stretching impossibly wide, her voice no longer her own. "The pact is made," she intoned, the words echoing from everywhere at once. "Blood for passage, but the forest remembers. The forest hungers." Then, with a final guttural shriek, she collapsed, her body crumpling to the ground like a puppet with its strings cut. Silence. Rodrigo didn't trust it. He kept his rifle trained on the doorway, his breath coming in sharp, controlled bursts. The Aswang were gone, at least for now. But the air still prickled with something unsaid, something waiting. Benjo was shaking beside him, his breath hitching. "Tatai, my hand!" Rodrigo looked down. The cut on Benjo's palm wasn't clotting. The blood was still flowing, slow but steady, dripping onto the dirt floor in a rhythm that felt deliberate. Too much blood. And then he saw it. The drops weren't just falling, they were being absorbed. The dirt drank them in greedily, and where they landed, tiny black tendrils sprouted, writhing like worms. Rodrigo's stomach lurched. "We need to go, now." He hauled Benjo to his feet, ignoring the boy's whimper of pain as he wrapped the bleeding hand in a strip of torn fabric. The doorway was clear, the night outside eerily still. No Aswangs, no chanting, just the oppressive weight of the forest, watching. They ran. The trees seemed to part for them this time, the path ahead clearer than before, but Rodrigo didn't trust it. Nothing in this forest was kind, nothing here helped without a price. Benjo stumbled, his steps growing sluggish. "Tatai, I don't feel good." Rodrigo glanced back and froze. Benjo's eyes were no longer brown. They were black. Pitch black from edge to edge like spilled ink. And he was smiling.
Rodrigo's breath caught in his throat as he stared into his son's eyes, those endless pools of black where warm brown should have been. Benjo's smile stretched too wide, his teeth gleaming in the moonlight like tiny, sharpened bones. "Benjo," Rodrigo whispered, his grip tightening on the boy's shoulders. The thing wearing his son's face tilted its head, the movement too fluid, too wrong. "Tatai," it said. But the voice was wrong, layered, like multiple voices speaking at once, one of them too deep, too guttural. Rodrigo recoiled, his heart hammering against his ribs. The forest around them had gone utterly silent. No crickets, no wind, just the slow, wet sound of Benjo's breathing, each exhale carrying a faint, rotten sweetness. Then Benjo's body twitched. His spine arched violently, a sickening crack echoing through the trees as his joints popped and rearranged. His fingers curled, nails darkening into claws. Rodrigo stumbled back, his rifle slipping from numb fingers. "No, no, no!" Benjo's skin rippled, shadows moving beneath it like serpents. His jaw unhinged with a wet pop, and when he screamed, it wasn't human. It was the same ear-splitting shriek the Aswangs had made. Rodrigo's legs gave out. He collapsed to his knees, his mind scrabbling for purchase. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. But it was. The transformation slowed, leaving Benjo hunched on all fours, his breath coming in ragged, animalistic pants. His eyes, still black, still hungry, locked onto Rodrigo. "Run," Benjo growled, the word barely recognizable. Rodrigo didn't hesitate. He ran. Branches lashed at his face as he crashed through the undergrowth, his lungs burning. Behind him, he could hear Benjo, no, not Benjo, not anymore, loping after him, the sound too light, too fast. A sob tore from Rodrigo's throat. His son was gone. Whatever that thing was now, it wasn't Benjo. The trees thinned suddenly, and Rodrigo skidded to a halt at the edge of a moonlit clearing. In the center stood a figure, tall, skeletal, its skin stretched taut over sharp bones. Lola Sella. But she wasn't alone. Dozens of them stood motionless in the clearing, their black eyes reflecting the moonlight, waiting. Benjo, the thing that had been Benjo, padded up beside Rodrigo, its breath hot against his neck. "Welcome home," it whispered. And then the Aswangs moved.
Rodrigo's scream died in his throat as cold, clawed hands seized him from all sides. The Aswangs moved with terrifying efficiency, their elongated fingers digging into his flesh like hooks as they dragged him forward. The clearing pulsed with an eerie luminescence, the air thick with the stench of rotting meat and damp earth. Moonlight filtered through the twisted branches above, casting jagged shadows that seemed to writhe like living things across the forest floor. At the center of the clearing stood an altar, an ancient, gnarled slab of blackened wood, its surface stained dark with generations of sacrificial offerings. The symbols carved into its surface matched the one in the shack, the spiral now glowing faintly with the same unnatural light that flickered in Benjo's hollow eyes. Lola Sella stepped forward, her skeletal fingers tracing the altar's edge. When she spoke, her voice was no longer her own. It echoed with the weight of countless whispers, as if something far older spoke through her. "The blood of the witness calls for balance," she intoned, her milky eyes fixed on Rodrigo. "A life for a life, a son for a son." Rodrigo thrashed against the creatures holding him, his muscles straining until he felt something tear in his shoulder. "What did you do to him? He's just a goy!" A wet, gurgling laugh came from behind him. Rodrigo twisted his head to see Benjo. No, not Benjo. Not anymore. Crouched at the edge of the clearing. The thing wearing his son's skin had changed further. Its jaw now unhinged like the others, its fingers elongated into cruel talons. But worst of all were its eyes, still too large for its face, still pitch black, but now gleaming with a terrible awareness. "Not boy," it rasped, the words bubbling up from somewhere deep in its corrupted throat. "More." Lola Sella raised a gnarled hand, and the Aswangs forced Rodrigo to his knees before the altar. The rough wood bit into his shins as one of the creatures yanked his head back by the hair, exposing his throat. Moonlight glinted off the curved, rusted blade another Aswang produced from the shadows. "Wait!" Rodrigo choked out. "You want a life? Take mine! Just let him go!" The clearing fell silent. even the wind stilled. Lola Sella tilted her head, considering. Then, slowly, she smiled, a grotesque stretching of lips over yellowed teeth. A father's sacrifice. Powerful, but not enough. She gestured to the thing that had been Benjo. The change has begun. Only one thing can stop it now. The Aswang holding the blade pressed it into Rodrigo's palm, forcing his fingers to close around the hilt. The metal was ice cold against his skin. "Kill him!" Lola Sella whispered. "Spill his blood on the altar before the transformation completes. Only then will the curse break." Rodrigo's vision swam. The blade trembled in his hand. Across the clearing, Benjo, his sweet, brave boy, let out a whimper that was almost human. "Tatai?" The word was small, broken. And in that moment, Rodrigo saw his son, truly saw him, fighting against whatever darkness had taken hold, saw the terror in those black eyes, the plea, the love. Rodrigo's fingers tightened around the blade. The Aswangs leaned forward in anticipation, and then
the blade flashed silver in the moonlight as Rodrigo spun with a steed born of desperation. But the knife wasn't aimed at Benjo. It arced upward in a vicious slash across the throat of the Aswang holding him. Black ichor sprayed across the altar as the creature reeled back, its shriek piercing the night. Chaos erupted in the clearing. Rodrigo didn't hesitate. He lunged for Benjo, wrapping one arm around his son's twisted form, while the knife slashed wildly at the closing circle of Aswangs. The blade connected with something fleshy, and a howl of pain echoed through the trees. "Run, Anak!" Rodrigo gasped, shoving Benjo toward the tree line. But his son didn't move. Benjo's body convulsed violently, his spine arching at an impossible angle. His mouth stretched wide in a silent scream as his skin rippled like water, shadows boiling beneath the surface. The transformation was accelerating. Lola Sella's laughter cut through the night. "Late now, Hunter. The boy belongs to the forest now." Rodrigo's vision tunneled. He could feel the ancient power in the clearing, a living, breathing thing that smelled of wet earth and copper. The altar pulsed with dark energy, drinking in the spilled blood. Then Benjo spoke. "Tatai?" The voice was layered, part child, part something far older. It hurts. Something inside Rodrigo shattered. With a roar that tore at his throat, he turned and plunged the ritual blade deep into the blackened altar. The wood screamed. A shock wave of force knocked the Aswangs to the ground as the spiral symbol cracked apart, glowing fissures spreading like spiderwebs through the ancient slab. The forest responded. Trees bent backward as if in pain. The earth trembled. From the cracked altar, thick black vines erupted, writhing like serpents as they lashed at the Aswangs. Lola Sella shrieked as one wrapped around her ankle, yanking her into the shadows beneath the trees. Rodrigo grabbed Benjo's hand, still mostly human, though the fingers were elongating, and ran. Behind them, the clearing dissolved into nightmare. The Aswangs turned on each other, their forms melting and reforming in the chaotic energy. The altar collapsed inward, sucking the screaming creatures into its maw like a black hole. Rodrigo didn't look back. Benjo stumbled beside him, his breath coming in wet, ragged gasps. "Tatai! I can't feel my legs!" Rodrigo risked a glance and nearly fell. Benjo's lower body was fading, not disappearing, but becoming insubstantial, like smoke. The curse wasn't broken, it was unraveling them both.
The village lights flickered in the distance, so close. Then the ground opened beneath them. Rodrigo barely had time to clutch Benjo to his chest as they plunged into darkness. The last thing he heard was his son's whisper, "Don't let go." Rodrigo awoke with a gasp, his lungs burning with the thick, fungal air of the underground. Darkness pressed against his eyes like a physical weight. His fingers scrambled across damp earth, and something worse, something that crackled like dried twigs but felt all too much like bones. "Benjo?" His voice emerged as a broken whisper. No response. A faint greenish luminescence began to pulse through the cavern, revealing the nightmare around him. They were in a vast, root-choked chamber, the walls woven from thousands of skeletal remains, some human, some decidedly not. The ceiling dripped with thick, viscous fluid that smelled of spoiled meat and copper. And then he saw Benjo. His son hung suspended in a web of black vines, his body twisted at unnatural angles. The transformation had progressed. His skin had taken on a grayish pallor, his fingers now fully elongated into claws. But worst of all were his eyes. No longer just black, they now glowed with that same sickly green light, pupils slit like a reptile's. "Tatai?" The voice was Benjo's, but underneath it, something else spoke too. Rodrigo staggered forward, only to freeze as the ground beneath him moved. The earth split open, revealing a yawning pit from which emerged hands, dozens of them, skeletal and rotting, grasping at his ankles. A dry chuckle echoed through the chamber. Lola Sella stepped from the shadows, but she was no longer the frail old woman. Her body had unfolded, limbs stretching grotesquely, her jaw splitting vertically to reveal a second mouth, lined with needle teeth. "You should have given him to the altar. Now the forest will take you both." The vines around Benjo tightened. He screamed, a sound that started human, but ended in something otherworldly. Rodrigo did the only thing he could. He reached into the pit of grasping hands and let them pull him down into the darkness.
Rodrigo's breath exploded from his lungs as he hit the bottom of the abyss. Bones shattered beneath him, releasing a cloud of grave dust that reeked of ancient cemeteries. Before him, pulsing like a monstrous heart, loomed the thing that planted the forest. It was no god, no demon, something older than both, a tangle of black roots and petrified flesh, with 1,000 mouths whispering dead languages. From its core snaked umbilical cords of darkness, each connected to an Aswang above, and one now tethered to Benjo. "Tatai!" Benjo's voice echoed through the cavern, but it came from all the creatures' mouths at once. Lola Sella, or what remained of her, scuttled along the walls like an insect, bones cracking. "You should never have come, Hunter. Now he feeds the eternal feast." Rodrigo felt the ritual knife in his pocket, his last weapon. But then he looked at Benjo, suspended in the air, half boy, half monster, and understood the true price. The knife clattered to the ground. "Take me, instead," Rodrigo commanded. Not to the creature, but to the forest itself. "My blood, my flesh, my memory, but let him go." The abyss held its breath. Then every mouth smiled at once. When the roots pierced Rodrigo, he didn't scream. When the first strip of flesh was devoured, he only hummed the lullaby Benjo's dead mother used to sing. And when the last shred of his humanity faded, he smiled, because somewhere above, Benjo was waking up. Alone. Whole. With no memory of a father who never existed.